How do they get all this food in Africa? We're going to dive in. I want to learn a bit about Africa. I have a terrible Boston accent. Let's go.
Welcome to one of the largest scale land restoration projects on the planet. Before this work, people relied on food aid just to survive. But 10 years ago, a vast barren wasteland began to transform, and now 500,000 people are feeding themselves from this land. So could this work be the key to ending hunger in Africa and beyond? Let's find out.
Dude, that's wild.
I'm traveling in the Sahel of Africa with the largest humanitarian agency on Earth, the United Nations World Food Program, the first responders to hunger in war zones and disasters. But what I came here to see is the mind-blowing work they're doing to actually solve hunger by fixing the underlying problem. Because when soils blow away and the land desertifies, people can't feed themselves. But what I'm witnessing here is the repair of soils and water across Africa at a scale that I never imagined possible. This is Africa's Great Green Wall, where a massive strip of trees is being planted across the continent to hold back the Sahara Desert. But the thing is, these places I went to are not places that just anyone can visit. Access is tightly controlled. But the WFP works wherever there's hunger in the world. So they invited me along on this mission to tell this critical story that almost no one knows about. And in this 4-part series, I'm explaining the details of some of the most important work of our time. We are here in Niger, Africa, known as Niger. In this nearly 5 square mile block of land restoration, 5 different villages planted about 100,000 trees, put in about 20 tons of grass seed, and we can see the land is starting to come back to life. But will the plants survive? The key is to make sure they get enough water. But that's not easy to do in a desert because this region has what's called the drought flood cycle. We have 9 dry months. The land becomes parched. And when the rains finally do come, the rain can't soak in. And it rushes down and it creates flooding in lowlands. But in the Sahel, we find an age-old water harvesting structure called the half moon. This simple structure has all of this capacity to store this water and hold this water until the water soaks down into the ground. There are a lot of different variations on these half-moon structures.
That's cool.
And which one you choose depends on what
Dude, I didn't know you could do this. This is wild.
your end goal is. Are you creating a forest or a grassland or a millet growing area? And how well do the soils hold or drain water? But the basic idea is that the half moon's laid out on contour and it's dug so it intercepts the water flowing down slope during heavy rains. There are deep pits dug inside and outside of the half moon called zai pits, which collect organic matter that blows or flows into the pits, and ultimately they allow for the deep soakage of rainwater into the ground. Oftentimes a tree is planted, as well as grasses and other seeds that germinate with the rains. Birds and wind bring in more seeds, and the half moon becomes a concentration point for water, nutrients, plants, and animals. The ecosystem grows and life returns. It's astoundingly simple, but how does it work in practice? This site is just 1 year old, and this site is the same design, but 8 years old. We've got the rows of half moons.
Look at that. You could see the patterns through the soil. That's crazy.
With the trees planted in them, and now the trees are growing up. They're beginning to form a canopy over the ground. We see the grasses, we see the ground covered, and even now we have water in these half moons.
So here you see this half moon. This is still the water at this stage. Still harvesting a lot of water. We have different local species and a lot of grasses. It's good animal feed. This shade, this temperature, you already have 5 to 8 degrees less compared to the places that are without treatment. This is one of the best ways to improve food security, because at the end of the day, this is a food basket in the making, but also nourish the land that nourishes people.
You must be wondering just how this restoration creates food. You see, when land's restored, it produces the grasses that feed livestock, which means people have milk to drink and meat to eat. The native Sahel trees produce leaves and fruits that can be eaten by the tough camels and goats who browse the thorny branches in times of need during the long dry season. The trees shade, they hold the soil, they soak in water, they nourish livestock.
Dude, that's crazy. Like, if it took 8 years to get to a point where now you could feed cattle from like desert, run this out like 50 years. How, like, by the time I'll probably be gone. I don't know how old I'm gonna be. I'm 40 now, 90. Well, let's say when I'm 80, how far have they extended the land in Africa if they keep going like this? That's wild, dude.
What I'd seen so far looked promising, but it's a pretty young site that hasn't fully developed. I couldn't help but wonder, is a system like this really enough to end hunger?
Could we do that in America?
To find out the truth, I needed to visit the very best site they could take me to near the southern border with Nigeria. The border is porous and there are militant groups that sometimes cross over, so we needed a military escort. But visiting this mature site was critical to seeing the full extent of what is possible in this kind of restoration work. What you see behind me was once a barren wasteland with compacted hardpan where the water was rushing quickly off, not soaking in, no organic matter, no plants, no trees, and now we see a dramatic transformation of this landscape. When we look at satellite images from the last 7 years, we can see that the area of bare exposed soil has literally dropped to zero.
Dude, that's insane. Dude, run this out to like 2050. What's Africa look like?
This land has fully recovered its capacity to hold water and grow biodiversity. And that means the potential for growing food is huge. That is so clear that the government of Niger is all in for this mega restoration. And I got the inside scoop directly from the chief forest ranger of the state of Maradi. He took me on a thorough tour of the site and pointed out all kinds of fascinating details, including some pretty remarkable ripple effects of the restoration work on the greater region.
Donc, et vous voyez, le niveau de régénération contribue vraiment à la concrétisation de la Grande Muraille Verte au Niger.
So what I learned was, since we are at the edge of the Sahara Desert, this area is really affected by strong, hot winds coming from the desert. This can really dry out the landscape. But this site's continuous tree canopy actually breaks the force of those drying winds. The point is to actually block the expansion of the desert. Niger is one of the hottest countries on the planet. The temperatures are significantly lower in these forested areas. And it's not just deep in the interior of the sites where you have all these trees, it's also the edges of the sites. We're seeing the same temperature effects.
Dude, you want to talk climate change? If you reforest the desert, what would that do to climate?
Whole project has become a biodiversity net. All sorts of seeds are blowing in, birds are attracted, they're bringing other seeds. Right now we're here in the 3-month wet season. It looks lush and green. You can see all of this fodder. You can imagine the animals becoming fat. But the critical function of this system is really in the dry season. 9 months of the year, this is dry, when there's just not a lot out there. So this diverse perennial polyculture here provides types of foods that can be harvested in the dry season. There are different yields that grow here even during the dry season. They're harvesting plants for culinary purposes, for medicinal purposes. We think of the Great Green Wall as stopping the expansion of the Sahara Desert, but it's actually so much more than that. The Great Green Wall is actually rebuilding the ecological matrix of a region. And when we start to see the effects at scale, like this large site and the 528 other Great Green Wall sites in Niger, we actually see the restoration of the ecological fabric of this region.
Wow.
Just within this 800 hectare site, there are 3 million cubic meters of water that have soaked into the ground here instead of running off. And 15% of that water is actually soaking into the deep aquifer and regenerating the permanent water table. The actual effects on people's lives is a very tangible thing. We traveled to a new garden in the nearby village to see the real-life effects of a regenerated water table.
Salam alaikum.
Over time, the water table has risen, and there's water available, allowing for production pretty much to take place all year round. In this area where we are, this is just a 1.5 hectare market garden site, one of 9.
Dude, that's incredible. That's incredible. Like, forget about your iPhone, man. They're taking the desert and turning it back into like
Communities here are now able to produce crops in these gardens because they're pumping water from the ground, water that has been improved from the rising water table due to the restoration activities that have taken place elsewhere. Before this activity, 9 out of every 10 children that were tested were malnourished. What we saw earlier in the market garden, the community is able to produce a variety of diverse nutritious foods, including vegetables and fruits, which are then also used in their local diets, contributing to a better nutrition for the community and lessening malnutrition for their children and for themselves.
Over the last 5 years in Niger, an average of 3 million people per year were food insecure and needed food aid. But in that same time period, these resilience projects have gotten 500,000 people off of long-term food assistance. Let that sink in for a minute.
500,000 people off of long-term food assistance is huge. Now, there's going to be a compounding effect to that. Those people are going to have more babies. Those babies are going to live longer because they have food. You're going to see a boom. It'll probably take 50 years, but like just think about stretching this whole thing out. If they keep adding to this, more water, groundwater set in, there's more food, there's more shade, there's more cattle, there's more healthy families, there's more civilization growth. There's going to be a boom over there. People are going to make more babies.
500,000 people are being fed from the 528 resilience projects in Niger. So this is obviously working on a lot of levels. But the big question is, how do we scale this up to the place where it can actually end regional hunger? In Niger, in the last 10 years, the World Food Program with the government and partners have restored about 300,000 hectares. When you do this type of land treatment, you're actually helping areas downstream because this water is soaking in. Then you also get this incredible wind protection effect. So for every hectare,
that's going to change the climate, everything south of that forest.
That you restore, you actually affect 3 times that amount of land. So the 300,000 hectares really is more like 900,000 hectares. Now, Niger is a huge country. The Sahel is a massive area. So this is still just a fragment of what needs to happen here, right? We're beginning to see a scale of solution that matches the scale of the problem.
Walking through this, you can imagine that you're walking through the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall is the possibility of transforming desert lands, degraded lands into food baskets. Now the vision is how we can collectively put all hands on deck and make this regeneration in sub-Saharan Africa, in the Sahel, in Niger, an unprecedented game changer.
The world
Crops, agriculture, exporting crop. As you get further and further along, you'll have better and better soil, which you can have a more diverse amount of crop probably. So you could, if you can grow your population and have an abundance of food, one thing you can export is food.
The World Food Program supports these projects in a lot of ways, including equipment, training, food, and money for the people doing the work. This helps to stabilize a community while growing their natural resources.
We can do this together with our partners. The government of Niger, they have taken resilience as their strong vision to transform rural areas in the country. This is very important within the context of Niger in terms of the concept of the land becoming the nourishing mother of the population.
Nous avons voulu, en tout cas, que nos actions rentrent dans le cadre donc, de ces actions de la Grande Rivière Verte.
It's basically saying that as WFP, we need to recognize that we can play a catalyst role, we can play a supporting role, but the biggest role and the biggest achievement is what actually communities are able to do by themselves. We really need to be engaged and motivated within the vision of the Great Green Wall.
Dude, you guys gonna be rich. Like, you're gonna be rich 50 years out, exporting all that abundance of food.
It means also a Great Green Wall against hunger.
That's right. You guys can have more food than you know what to do with. That's spectacular. I'll leave the original video down below. I'll leave some affiliate links down below to some great reads and books that you guys can check out. Any commissions are from that, go right back on the channel, help us grow, support our family, and share these messages like this. This is an awesome video. This is really cool of what's going on out there. I can just imagine this years and years out. It's completely self-sufficient. These people their population is gonna grow gangbusters and then have tons of amounts of food, probably to export to all the closer regions. Awesome. Thanks, guys.